Okay. Okay.
I'll go sit down.
Good to see you.
They explain to you the paths.
Yeah. Yeah. Camera follows me. Yep. I think that's cool.
Everyone, let's come together and get started. My name is Paul Schrum, and I'm a student in the Center for Geospatial Analytics, a Master's in GIS Technology. And I have the great privilege of introducing our speaker today, and I think this is a subject that you're really going to enjoy. Our guest speaker today, Dr. Joe Hummer, is the State Traffic Management Engineer for the North Carolina Department of Transportation in Garner, North Carolina. He has a BS and MS degrees in civil engineering from Michigan State and a PhD from Purdue. He specializes in the design and operation of intersections and interchanges. He spent most of his career on civil engineering faculties at UNC Charlotte, North Carolina State, and Wayne State, rising through the ranks to department chair. Joe had a successful research career with over 100 peer-reviewed papers published. In 2016, to try to get things implemented more quickly, he left academics to join mobility and safety at the NC Department of Transportation. Joe has made several presentations on the future with autonomous vehicles, has helped mobility and safety craft AV policy, and is working on a book on the effects of autonomous vehicles. So please welcome Dr. Joe Hummer.
Great. Paul, thank you. And it is a pleasure to be here and to talk about this amazing change that I think we're about to experience that's coming soon. And it will affect all of our worlds, that is, all of us that live on planet Earth. It will affect my world as a traffic engineer, and it will affect your world as a geospatial professional. And for us, it'll be more profound than just a random person out there. But for all of us, it's going to affect us a great deal. So thanks for inviting me and giving me a chance to talk about this, what I think is going to be a huge, awesome change for all of us. So here's my disclaimer. When I'm talking about NCDOT policy, I'll try to indicate that. And mostly what I'm talking about is Joe's opinion. So that's mostly what you're gonna get here, and certainly not endorsing any of the products that I happen to show, like Audi, for instance, in this slide. My objectives today, talking with you, are two, and one is to talk about how autonomous vehicles, AVs, will affect North Carolina and the U.S. in particular, and we could probably extend that to the rest of the world too, but let's stick with especially what we know, and then what can we do to prepare, right? There's going to be a lot of positives, mostly positives, but there'll certainly be some negative impacts as well, and could we get ready for those, mitigate those, and make the world even better once this change happens. So that's where I'm headed today. Autonomous vehicle, let's define that before we get too far in. And my kind of simple definition there is a self-driving on-the-road motor vehicle. And what we categorize autonomous vehicles in terms of levels. So I drive a vehicle right now that's a level 0, which means nothing autonomous. It's completely at my beck and call. But level 1 is adaptive cruise control, and level 2 is also lane keeping. We move up through the levels. What I'm talking about for the most part in these slides is level 5, and that's the ultimate, and that is a vehicle that moves along the roadways, and there's no steering wheel, there's no pedals. The passengers in the vehicle somehow conveyed to the vehicle the destination, where they want the vehicle to go, but it's completely up to the vehicle to get from origin to destination. So again, no steering wheel, no pedals. What the picture I'm showing you here is the autonomous vehicle I had the pleasure of riding in about a year ago at Fort Bragg. You see it's a golf cart, but it was level 4. So that vehicle has a steering wheel and has some pedals. They needed the steering wheel and pedals to get out of the parking garage where that vehicle usually lives And then once it's out of the parking garage, they flip a switch from human to robotic, and hands off the steering wheel, feet off the pedals, and the golf cart zooms away across Fort Bragg. Its day job is to take wounded soldiers from the barracks to the hospital and back again, and it's cool PR. They could hire a private to do that same job, but an AV is good PR for them. The really remarkable thing about this program to me was that it cost $600,000 to get this vehicle to this stage with all off-the-shelf parts. And $600,000 to the Army, that they'd lose that in the couch cushions every night, right? That's nothing to them. And to get to level 4 for only that budget, I thought was really awesome. It was a cool vehicle. If you have a chance, I definitely recommend a ride in one. It kind of took my breath away when that person behind the steering wheel flipped to robotic, and then there we went across Fort Bragg, through intersections, through stop signs, down regular streets with regular traffic, all of that. The thing that sold me on autonomous vehicles a few years ago was when the case was made, which I firmly believe, the fourth bullet here, that we're not going to need new infrastructure. Because as a civil engineer, as a transportation engineer, I know that usually our budgets are stretched. Right now, I've been bragging all day about NCDOT, how much funding we have right now. Right at this moment, we're sitting on a pile of cash, but usually we're not, and usually most DOTs are not. And if it required some big infrastructure to get an autonomous vehicle in place, a new set of sensors or a wire running down the center line or something, we wouldn't do it. We can't afford that. It's not going to happen. Taxpayers wouldn't put up with it. What sold me on autonomous vehicles, that they're coming soon, was the realization that they don't need infrastructure. They're going to need smooth pavement and a bright line. And that's something DOT can do within our current budget. So that, to me, that was the big kind of sticking point that's not sticking anymore. I think they're coming sooner than later. Throughout my presentation in red, that's kind of my prompt, or can be yours too, of the aspects that are more geospatial, that might be of more interest to you. How does that vehicle get across Fort Bragg or across North Carolina or across the United States? Is these ways, right? There's a battery of sensors on that vehicle to help it navigate the mean streets. And first and foremost is somebody has preloaded a map into that vehicle, into the computer, and that is a much better map than probably we currently have at NCDOT. Poor quality. We have a GIS layer with all the roads, right? You probably use it, but it's a poor quality. It's good enough for government work, but not good enough for Google or Lyft or Ford or Toyota or whoever. So, somebody's going to need to load a really high resolution, high quality map in that vehicle. All kinds of battery of sensors and cameras and such. GPS, of course. Crowdsourcing, so that's the connected part of, sometimes you hear connected an autonomous vehicle. The vehicles will talk to each other, communicate with each other, and then some connection to infrastructure. So, not to say that NCDOT or our other agencies out there won't do some things to the roadways to help communicate to those vehicles. We'll probably transition as an agency from being an agency that lays asphalt to an information agency in the coming 20 or 30 years. We do some of that now. We're going to do much more of that in the future, I think, to communicate to the vehicle fleets out there. For instance, work zones, right? The map is awesome, but when the road changes and we all of a sudden close a lane because we're maintaining, we kind of need to communicate that to the vehicles. And the crummy old orange sign in the road, it can't be our only way to communicate that. So the connected infrastructure, we're still going to do a good bit of that. And you all in the geospatial world will be helpful to make that happen. I think they're coming quickly. I am very optimistic here. I'm not a software person. I don't know what's involved in, somebody says it's 50 million lines of code or something. All right, let's go write some code then, I guess. I don't know. That's not my thing. So if you are a software person that's knows how difficult it is to write 50 million lines of good code, tell me and I'll revise my opinion. But from what I read, from what I know, what people are telling me, I think they're coming sooner than later. And here's my reasoning. Safer, the ability not to kill 40,000 people a year on the roads in the U.S., in North Carolina, not to kill 1,500 people a year on the roads. People are buying into that idea. It's my generation's chance to make a big impact in highway safety. And cheaper, right? It costs about 55 cents a mile to drive now on average, and the estimates of autonomous vehicles are something in the 30 to 40 cents a mile range. We'll talk about why that is in a minute, but that's going to all of a sudden occur to all of us as consumers that, hey, we can do this cheaper. We can get from point A to point B where we want to go and save money doing that. And oh, by the way, the 55-cent number will probably rise because in the future, every crash between a human-driven vehicle and an autonomous vehicle will be the fault of the human-driven vehicle. And so the humans that remain driving, their insurance rates are going to go up, up, up. And that will be a problem for them. Time savings, because the vehicle will get you there quicker, optimum routing and all that kind of stuff. Benefits for many groups of consumers. That's older people, that's younger people, that's disabled people, blind and wheelchair bound and such. All kinds of people right now who live in places like Raleigh that have terrible public transportation and very expensive taxis and don't trust Uber and Lyft and such, and really are kind of homebound, will all of a sudden be mobile. Terrific. And so they're going to realize that, and they're going to demand that, those consumers. The manufacturers are all in. The plans, Ford was out just the other day reaffirming their commitment to be at level 5 by the year 2021. So they've invested, they've raised billions, they've invested billions to write those 50 million lines of code or whatever, and they are committing to be there. Disincentives at levels 3 and 4. Level 3 and 4 are the sort of semi-autonomous levels, and the disincentive there is that there's still a steering wheel, there's still a brake, which means there still needs to be a driver with a driver's license and an insurance policy. And to me, that's the worst of all worlds, right? The manufacturer's on the hook, and the driver's still on the hook. So I think we're going to skip by those levels relatively quickly and get to where the real prize is at level 5. I talked about the infrastructure and then no showstoppers. People will bring up security questions, right? What if the bad guys get a hold of all our cars and crash them, and what about liability? And there are certainly issues, but we could go over those if time allows. And I think I've got the answers for most of those, and not like I made them up, right? There's answers out there for almost all those objections. So I think they're coming quickly. I love this slide. This is the pace of technology adoption in the U.S. You probably have seen this or a version of it through time. What this is really trying to tell us is that innovations are being picked up quicker as the years have gone on and throughout the last century. So that right on the right side there, internet and cell phone, really within about 20 years went from almost 0 to almost 80 or 90 or 100% of U.S. consumers. And autonomous vehicles will probably be more like that as compared to the clothes washer or the refrigerator, or even electricity back in the day. Again, there's no showstoppers. There's no big infrastructure that has to be built like electricity, for instance. There is certainly money involved, but when we run the numbers out, we see it's actually a net savings that's going to happen. So I'm of the opinion, I think this change will be more like the cell phone adoption and smartphone adoption that happened within about 20 years. And if you ask me to make a prediction, I think we're 20 years away from the point where we get saturated, which is to say about 80 or 85% of vehicle fleet, vehicles on Western Boulevard being autonomous. Okay, so in conjunction with autonomous, I think two other big important changes are happening, and that is to move to a subscription model and to move to electric vehicles. And the way the manufacturers are going and the way that the market seems to be headed, the smart investors are going, looks like those three happen pretty simultaneously. So autonomous means no steering wheel, no pedals. Subscription model means Google or Ford or Toyota or Uber owns all the vehicles, and almost all of us will subscribe to that, to transportation as a service rather than own our own autonomous vehicle. And electric, of course, means not burning gasoline anymore. So a typical trip in the year 2038, 20 years from now. I hope to live long enough to see it. I think it's going to be very cool. I'll be old then. I'm old now. I'm getting older. Be really old then. I hope to give up my driver's license and turn it in for a Google subscription and buzz around Raleigh, get wherever I want to go by swiping a card and jumping into the car and letting it take me where I want to go. So that's the way this thing should work. You order a car, you've already subscribed, you punch a button when you want to go somewhere, you order a car, it shows up. The models that I've seen run that have been published so far says in a city like Raleigh, that car should get to your address within a minute. Here's this geospatial aspect. Big business and how to stage those cars. Lots, storage areas, car servicing facilities, places that keep cars clean and charged and ready to roll, and anticipating where the next call is going to come from and have a car on the way there. That big old map with all the big old, with the blips for where our cars are, and somebody back behind that manipulating that and showing where it's supposed to go in a very similar way that the airlines do now, managing their fleets. You punch a code, the door opens, you get in, yeah, it looks clean, it's okay. If it's not clean, you rate the previous occupant or the service provider. Right? You buckle in, you don't have to face forward anymore. The seats will be probably rearrangeable and you can recline, whatever. There's security, there's a camera always watching you. And if there's other people in the vehicle, they're going to watch all of you to make sure that crimes aren't committed or you're not committing a crime. So that's another aspect we're all going to have to live with. Well, we already do, but it'll be more of it than was there before. Big productivity gains. Everybody thinks that time in the vehicle, that we're going to fire up our laptop or our tablet and start answering emails and start blasting out memos, right? That we're going to do productive work while we're in the car, that the timesheet you're going to sign in for your daily work will start when you get in the car. We'll see how that goes. I don't know. Or are you going to go to sleep or watch a movie or catch up on last night's late night TV shows? I don't know. The car zooms along to the destination following optimum route. There's a geospatial aspect, right? Doing those algorithms, constantly fine-tuning algorithms to get all those cars on all the optimum route between here and there. You probably get there more quickly than you do now for reasons I'll list in a few slides. And then at the destination, in case you're asleep, we get an alarm, maybe a buzzer in the seat, maybe an ejection button, I don't know. Empty car moves on, and the cost, if you're not already just with the monthly subscription, the cost is added to your bill. So welcome to transportation in the year 2038. I think the analogy is to the building of the interstate system. Those guys, almost all guys, were sitting there in 1952 knowing that interstates were coming, and I think they did a very poor job of planning and anticipating what that world would look like and how interstates would lead to the decline of downtowns and the rise of suburbs and strip malls and fringe developments and 1,000 other changes. And we are at that same point relative to autonomous vehicles now, and we should try to think ahead and try to prepare for that world that is almost certainly coming. It's going to be that big. It's going to affect everything around us and certainly all of our jobs if you stay in engineering or in geospatial. So here's the really good news is safety, right? The tragic accident that happened the other day on Southwest, the woman that got killed out the window there. Of course, that same day, 100 people got killed on the roadways across the U.S. Where was the outrage for that, right? It's so ingrained in us, that huge cost that we as a society pay. It's not even part of our conscious, but it should be. If you had to go back to the year 1900 and say, will we adopt this form of transportation that is great in many aspects, but it's going to kill 40,000 Americans a year, we would say, heck no. Let's find some other way to get there, right? But we don't have that luxury. And well, now we do have that luxury. We have a chance to consciously adopt this technology that has a chance really not to kill 40,000 people a year anymore. It's even more of a worldwide problem, 1.2 million worldwide, and it's even more of a young person's disease. That is, the biggest toll is paid by people, if I remember my statistics right here, it's the biggest killer of age people 16 to 27, and I think the second biggest killer of people age 4 to 15. They're giving up 70 years of life expectancy, right, when one of those crashes happens that kills somebody that age. So let's not do that anymore. Autonomous vehicles will have crashes, will have fatalities, will be injuries, but eventually we'll get those ironed out. And that's already happening. Every bad crash that happens, the software people get back to work, write some more millions of lines of code, and we won't have that type of crash again. All of these reasons for believing that in the end we're going to get a much safer system out there. The bottom line, overcoming that objection regarding liability, is the car companies know that they're going to be liable, right? You remove the steering wheel, you move the pedals from the vehicle. How can I, as the occupant, possibly be responsible for that crash? The car company has to assume that liability. So it becomes an insurance game, right? They're going to bake the cost of that liability into the subscription price, and the only thing that matters will be correctly predicting how many crashes and how much each of those costs, and adding that into the price there. And they know they're going to have to do that. They're already trying to do that. The actuarial kind of math is going to run out there, and that problem will be solved. That's something that we can do. All right, on the travel efficiency side, this is not as clear-cut. There's a better argument to be made to and fro both ways here. Will travel be more efficient, less congestion, or more congestion? And here's the case, as I understand it, both ways. Raw road capacity will increase by something like 50%. So at the stop bar out here in Western Boulevard, we get now about 1,800 vehicle per hour per lane through there, two second between vehicles basically. And when we go to autonomous vehicles, we're going to increase that saturation flow rate to something like 3,000 vehicle per hour per lane, just because the space between vehicles is going to shrink up. The better sensors, the quicker reactions means more vehicles past the stop bar, which means an almost instantaneous increase in road capacity, and that's going to be fantastic. Optimum routing with current roadway information, like I mentioned before, DOT telling the vehicle where the work zones are, where the road might have moved last night because we made some change. Ride sharing, because that's going to be our way to equity in a future autonomous vehicle world. Discounts for people who are willing to have other people ride with them, strangers, and willing to make other stops along the way. Get a lower subscription price. Some of us will be willing to do that, some of us won't, but for lower income people, that will be available and will be a good thing. And then trucks, which I've got another slide on that in a little bit. Trucks will be autonomous. They'll probably be the first type of vehicle to go autonomous. And what that means is they can run at night. and we don't have to have trucks out there on I-40 at 4 p.m. getting in everybody's way, taking up the space that 3 or 4 passenger vehicles could be occupying. They'll just run at night because they can, because driver sleep rules no longer matter. And so that'll be a big change. It'll be a positive for congestion. Here's some more reasons that things would be more efficient. A surprising amount of travel now is people looking for parking. Okay, that's never a problem on NC State campus, I know. But other parts of the world, it's some outrageous, 10% of all miles in New York City, something like that, is people just cruising for a parking space, which won't matter anymore. So we get rid of just that total drain on the system. Narrower lanes, where maybe not Western Boulevard, but maybe I-40, we can take 3 12-foot lanes and shrink them down maybe into, I'm going to do my math here, 3 8-foot lanes for autonomous vehicles and 1 12-foot lane for the remaining antique human vehicles. And basically create an extra lane with the same pavement now. Finally, for me as a traffic engineer, I'm going to get to have some real fun if I can live that long and stay professionally active. Traffic engineering, cycle by cycle or minute by minute, doing virtual traffic engineering, so turn prohibitions and virtual one-way streets. I love design called a super street, right, where everybody turns right and then makes a U-turn. Now it's hard to do to get that concrete in place, but in the future I can do that virtually. Just beam out a signal that says all vehicles have to turn right at this intersection and make the U-turn down here. And what I'm showing you in the diagram here is a design that they're starting to experiment with in China, that basically as you move up to an intersection, a gate opens up to the left of the left turn lane and some vehicles filter on over there, so you get a dual left turn lane in the same space where normally we just have a single left turn lane. They can do it in China because they can make people do things over there, right? We can't really do that here. Our drivers don't follow directions that well. But in an autonomous age, the drivers are out of it, right? It's all just electronic. That gate opens and we tell a certain number of vehicles to go over into that left lane, and we just doubled the left turn capacity at that intersection with no extra pavement. So as a traffic engineer, it's going to open up all kinds of possibilities like that for sort of, minute by minute, cycle by cycle, virtual roadway designs out there. On the other hand, when travel is cheaper and easier and safer, it doesn't take an economic genius to know that consumers will probably do more of it. Right? I went to Venezuela a few years ago. Gas costs 12 cents a gallon in Venezuela. There are people who basically are homeless, live in their cars, and spend most of the night just driving around because that's cheaper than renting. And autonomous vehicles something like that might start to happen here too, with cheaper, easier travel and empty trips, deadheading, back and forth, longer trips. People won't mind commuting longer when the commute is, I sit back and read my tablet or enjoy a movie or sleep or whatever. And people will probably shift modes from transit and maybe from walking and bicycling as well to this easier, cheaper way to travel. So that's offsetting the more efficient travel with that there'll be more travel. I think on the balance, reflecting the prevailing feeling in the literature is that overall travel will get more efficient, but this is something we're going to have to watch out for. And those who have an interest in travel modeling, behavioral modeling, this will be an interesting question for y'all to see where the balance eventually ends up falling there. Let's talk about roads for a minute. That is my job. I enjoy being paid. Appreciate that paycheck that comes in every other week. I want to continue to be paid, and that is going to be a problem because the pie chart there is showing you funding sources for my employer, NCDOT. Almost half is from motor fuel taxes, And remember, cars, I think, are going to go mostly electric, so that's going to dwindle down to almost zero, that source. And then another big chunk, about a third or so of that pie, is vehicle registrations. DMV registrations, what's called highway use tax there. And in a subscription era, most of the cars will belong to Google or Ford or somebody who are going to register their cars in whatever state is the cheapest. New Mexico is going to offer $1 a year registration, and so North Carolina will lose that revenue as well. So for those of us who enjoy getting paid by doing roads, we got a bit of a funding problem here that we're going to have to solve somehow. Not to mention that when there's no more safety or capacity issues, that it's going to occur to somebody that we really don't need new roads anymore. And that huge chunk of the budget that goes to highway construction is going to dwindle away. And the 2 million people across the country who make their living building roads are going to have to find another way to earn a living, most of those anyway. And so we've got some funding and some spending issues looming for us at the NCDOT with these transitions. Our leadership is aware of these problems. They're working on it. Unfortunately, above them is a thing called the legislature, who tends to be a bit of a, pardon the pun here, a roadblock. So we've got some things to fight through to be sustainable as an agency. And then what to do about those 2 million highway construction jobs is a bigger problem, I think, than I know what to do with anyway. So we need new revenue sources. For you guys in the geospatial area, this is a big professional opportunity to do something like congestion pricing, to do weight distance fees and GPS-based fee structure somehow to make sure that Google and Ford and Toyota pay their fair share to maintain the roads in Raleigh or in North Carolina. That's all going to be a big old database, a big old map behind it at the heart of that negotiation that's going to be every year between NCDOT and those companies. Transit is going to be interesting to see what happens with that. I posed it as a question here: will AVs take over much of the transit market? I can answer my own question there. I think yes. I don't think that's really a serious question. Other than New York and Chicago and a few other big cities, in a place like Raleigh, why would you ever ride the Raleigh bus anymore if you could get a door-to-door AV ride like I described earlier? The bus just makes no sense for anybody, commuter or captive rider anymore. So I don't know. Maybe somebody can make a case for it in a particular corridor in Raleigh or in the Triangle, but it's hard for me to see where transit can possibly compete for travelers. So for local governments, again with the eye on equity, what happens to the people with lower incomes out there that need a way to get from point A to point B? I think the transit agency gradually evolves into an agency that decides who gets subsidized and by how much to subsidize their AV subscription. Here's a picture of the Durham Orange light rail. This is definitely not NCDOT talking here. This is Joe talking and saying that I think this is a complete white elephant, the wrong thing to be built at the wrong time. As soon as they get this thing built, transit riderships are already falling across the country with Uber and Lyft cutting into their riders. But to try to spend this much money on a system like this at this point just makes absolutely no sense to me with this competitor coming up on the horizon. My agency feels differently, but that was what my opinion on transit and Raleigh, I think, again, for me, fortunately, Raleigh did not make the same decision. Trucking, mentioned that already. The implications on trucking are going to be ginormous. Talk about the drivers first and the 1.8 million people across the country that make their living as professional truck drivers. In many parts of the U.S., trucking is the most popular occupation. More people make their living at trucking than anything else, any other profession. And many of those jobs are going to go away. The long haul trucking will probably go first. Delivery type trucking, construction type trucking, that's I think probably harder to automate. But anybody going over the road, over freeways, that's going to be endangered, and that'll probably be the first type of vehicles that will go. And it's easy to see why. The pie chart there shows you the two biggest costs of trucking are fuel and driver. And if you can cut out the driver almost entirely and then reduce the fuel, because a automated truck will be much more efficient, that it's easy to see why the trucking companies are falling all over themselves to try to get automated as soon as they can. So you've all seen probably the experiments out there, the beer truck that drove across Colorado. That's been about a year and a half ago now. In North Carolina, we have a official, one of the 10 designated official experiment sites around the country. That's the NC 540 toll road, and experiments being run out there now on truck platooning, which is one truck running behind the other at a distance of about 40 feet or so, where the second truck driver hands off the steering wheel and letting the first driver do the driving. In that case, for fuel savings. But so if you head out that way and see a couple trucks at some point way too close to each other, it might actually be an official experiment. Volvo is the main trucking company out there now. So more quickly through some other user groups here that probably will stand more to benefit. Again, older people, it's going to be fantastic. My father went through a couple years ago when he had to give up his driver's license, and it was so traumatic. Driving for 60 years or whatever, and then the moment came where he was more harm to himself and to others on the road, and it was the right decision, but it was just so awful. He's homebound. He's now relying on other people to get him back and forth. So this technology just frees up, probably gives, on average, an older person another 5 years, maybe 10 years of mobility, of real good mobility, door-to-door freedom. So for older people, no question, this is going to be just a awesomely terrific improvement. Younger people. So we have a law in North Carolina now that allows autonomous vehicles. They're legal on our streets. Level 5, law passed last year. And I had a tiny little role in helping pass that legislation. And my recollection is I came up with the number 12. Sitting in a meeting there musing about, well, what's the right age that we should allow a person to ride in an autonomous vehicle by himself or herself. And I suggested 10. And that was too aggressive. So, well, how about 12? And it stuck. So it is now legal for a 12-year-old to get in an autonomous vehicle and ride across North Carolina. For the soccer mom here in the picture, that's a cliche, but there are people like that out there. And the soccer dads and anybody who's in the business of chauffeuring around a teenager, this is going to be a terrific innovation. You already know people, probably nieces, nephews, sons, daughters, who are in the late teens or early 20s who do not have driver licenses. There's a generation coming up now who don't really care to drive. And this will feed into that trend that's already happening, that people will be mobile without having to drive. For disabled people, the part 2 of the Fort Bragg demonstration I was at last year was a completely a wheelchair van that was completely self-loading, so did not need an operator either to drive or to help the wheelchair-bound patient to load himself or herself into the van. So again, that's just a terrific thing for that demographic segment there to offer those folks mobility that they have not had ever. For commuters, you can see the estimate there by some consulting company or another. Every year, $422 billion of productivity of people answering emails while they're in their autonomous vehicle on their way to work or coming back. I don't know. There will be some. For people who are salespeople, or my sister is a special education teacher, spends most of her day on the road going from one school to another to visit the students she's been assigned, and she has to fill out reports for each student as she visits, and now she has to do that at night after her day rounds. But if she can do those reports in the vehicle on the way to the next appointment, and there's millions of people that have jobs like that, right, who will be much more productive using that time on the road instead of driving. So for them, it's going to be awesome. Yeah, I did have mentioned this at lunch. For you in the geospatial world, here's where the real money's going to be, right? Advertising in the vehicle. You're in your autonomous vehicle. You're on the way to work. Well, for me, I love Dunkin' Donuts, right? And then autonomous vehicles can make a suggestion to me right at the right moment. So, you know, Joe, there's a Dunkin' Donuts shop 2 minutes ahead, and we can call ahead and place your order, and it'll be ready at the drive-thru. In fact, you just give us the verbal word, and we'll already charge it to your credit card. You can practically not even have to stop the car, just grab your bag and sail right through the drive-thru. So we've already got this kind of advertising. Google helpfully places all kinds of ads for us, but the new aspect here is going to be the geospatial one, to place the right ad not only at time, but at the right space as you're nearing the Dunkin' Donuts or whatever hotel chain that Google has worked out an arrangement with or given you a discount for, to put together those packages of, let's call them traveler services, that go along with your vehicle subscription. All right, some other ones that I think will be big. Land use changes, right? That's a picture of downtown Phoenix. About half the surface of downtown Phoenix is surface parking. It's a heat island. It's ugly. It destroys the pedestrian fabric of downtown, and most of that parking is not going to be needed anymore. So what's that going to do to downtown? How are we going to reuse those spaces? And all of a sudden that space will be much more productive than it is now, probably. This is Triangle Town Center, North Raleigh, the newest mall in Wake County. It's that little spot in the middle, that's the mall, surrounded by that huge area of parking. As you drive in there, you don't notice it. The parking is pretty well shielded. They put bushes and trees in front. You don't realize how ginormous that parking space is, the parking area. The statistic is, in the United States, we paved over an area the size of Connecticut for parking. So we've got 49 states that do business, and we've got one state where we park our cars. What's the world going to be like? What's the United States going to be like when we don't have to devote Connecticut to just parking our cars anymore? How are we going to reuse that parking around Triangle Town Center? Indeed, if the mall still is in business, then, of course, other big changes going on. But if retail is still a thing 20 years from now, what are we going to do with that parking that's around there? And that's for those of you in the geospatial area, that's going to be big, I think. Oh, and by the way, you won't need your garage anymore, or that driveway anymore. It's going to change the way we live. Housing, downtown housing, right? A big part of the high cost of downtown housing is the parking space. That's either you pay for directly or it's baked into your rent, and that's going to evaporate. So downtown is going to be a much more attractive place to live. In the suburbs, well, I always wanted a man cave, right? And ex-urban areas. This is a big threat, I think. Again, geospatial all over this. Well, the picture here is Carr Lake. You know Carr Lake, it's about an hour north of Raleigh. Great asset, mostly undeveloped to this point. When we have autonomous vehicles and it's an easy, less than an hour commute back and forth to Carr Lake, why do I want to live in a crappy subdivision in North Raleigh when it'll take me just a little longer to live on the lake, right? So if I'm in the business of protecting Carr Lake or places like that, I better get out there now and make those changes to protect those areas. Zoning, don't extend the sewer lines, don't pave the roads, whatever mechanisms are out there to prevent that kind of sprawl that I am certain is going to occur, and a lot of the other literature as well. Get out there ahead of it for places like this. Wilmington is 2 hours away. That's a little bit too far maybe for that commute, even in a comfortable autonomous vehicle, but at about an hour perimeter around an employment center like Raleigh or RTP, where are the vulnerable spots, Carr Lake, Jordan Lake, etc., and let's get out there and let's get them protected before they're gone, before sprawl goes and getting some. So more quickly through the rest of the list, and then we'll wrap up and take some questions here. There's going to be all kinds of good and bad environmental effects here. Most of the literature says the global warming, the CO2 effect is going to be good, and that's mostly due to the electrification, not so much the autonomous. Water quality impacts, because there's not parking anymore, and all those acres of pavement where there's big runoff aren't needed anymore. Noise impacts, that's probably a negative. Those trucks running along at night, more trucks at night will probably have impact on the people living along the interstates. Wildlife, we kill a ginormous number of creatures on the highways every year now, and we're going to reduce that toll greatly. Where is that going to be, and how can we predict and help that along? I think will be terrific. On the other hand, that urban sprawl that I think will happen will also eat into a lot of the habitat that's out there. So how can we get that protected? In the oil industry, got about 200,000 gas stations across the country. About 190,000 of those will go out of business in the next 20 years and leave their leaking tanks behind. So how are we going to find those, fix those before those become a big problem? By the way, the federal government just reduced its budget for finding and fixing leaking oil tanks by about half this year. So they're kind of going in the wrong direction. We're probably going to have to do this one ourselves. Other impacts, what I'm showing you there is Hurricane Rita evacuation out of Houston in 2005, a traffic nightmare, right? I think 11 people got killed during the evacuation. The storm itself, not so bad. The evacuation was horrible. Autonomous vehicles could actually make that situation worse, right? When it's not only a question of highway capacity, but it's a question of, do we have enough vehicles? When that hurricane is heading for Miami or New Orleans or Charleston or Wilmington or wherever, can we get enough vehicles in there? And that's, again, there's a geospatial aspect to that. Where are your vehicles? How can we stage them, and how can we get them in there to help that evacuation? Okay, here's NCDOT official policy. We're all in. We're doing whatever we can to encourage because we think it's all about safety. And this is maybe in the past we've been more lip service about safety, but here this time we really mean it. We really see our chance to reduce that terrible toll that we take right now for mobility. And if we can help more citizens be mobile and reduce congestion, that's great too. But as an agency, we're all in, and it's mostly because of the safety aspects. We're going to be important at the state level. The feds have a big role because they regulate vehicle side of things. But at the state level, we still do a lot of things that will be important to the transition over to autonomous vehicles. So here's ways that we're going to have to still be involved. Recognizing that, about 2 years ago, the leaders commissioned what they called a roadmap to autonomous vehicles, and there's the website where the document lists. Basically, it was trying to do what I'm doing here, looking ahead but from a state government lens, and what are the actions we need to do as NCDOT and other state agencies to be ready for autonomous vehicle future. And they came up with 27 activities, as you can see there, some of which are underway. And the big thing that's happened since then has been the legislation. That was last summer, a rare bit of bipartisanship. The only issue that the Republicans and the Democrats can agree on these days is that they're all about autonomous vehicles. Right? As far as I know, there's only one state around the 50 that has actually prohibited autonomous vehicles, a governor that vetoed legislation, and everybody else is in some form or another. Most are not as aggressive as us here doing these two things, but this is a rare time when it seems to transcend politics. So autonomous vehicles are legal, and then the truck platooning experimentation like it's happening on the toll road is also legal. So where we expect to be is as a DOT is to do these things. We need funding. We need to get that worked out before we kind of dry up and go out of business. But assuming that we can get our funding source straightened out, our job is going to be smooth pavement and bright line. And then whatever else we can do on the information side, getting good information out to the vehicles, fantastic. And then for those of us in traffic engineering, to do some kind of really cool minute-by-minute things there. So my vision, autonomous vehicles, and again, I don't think it's just me. I think the general reading of the literature there is a very hopeful and bright future. Safer, cheaper, quicker. Providing mobility for many more people. It's unless you've got elderly parents, unless you're the parent of a 12-year-old, unless you know somebody or care for somebody in a wheelchair, you don't understand the mobility restrictions that a huge segment of our population has right now, and especially in an area like Raleigh that has poor public transportation. And that's going to go away. It's going to be awesome. So here's some of the actions that I can foresee, but you all from your own perspectives, I'm sure, could see a lot more than me. And again, the red ones are the ones that I think are, with a particular geospatial aspect involved. Federal, again, they need to get their act together and legislate the vehicles well. States, we need to do our things. Local governments, that's the cities and the counties. That's where the issues of parking and land use, protecting against sprawl and protecting habitat and those kind of things kick in, and that's where they're going to have to really do some good work. For the general public and the media, the message is don't panic, right? There's going to be crashes. There's going to be fatalities. That one in Arizona a couple weeks ago. There's going to be more. All so experimental, but the prize is so wonderful that we've got to work our way through these hiccups and get there to a much more wonderful future. Training people, here's sort of the education side of NC State University and other places. New academic programs, retraining workers. What are we going to do with all those construction workers and truck drivers and taxi drivers and all kinds of other people who will be out of work sooner than later to make sure that they're still productive and contributing. And then research questions, innumerable research questions that all of this creates, that if that's your business, it's going to be a good 10 or 20 years here. So that's my take on it. My contact information, I'd be happy to carry on the conversation on this topic. Obviously, I have some opinions here and wouldn't mind hearing yours and carrying on. But again, I really appreciate the invitation here today and the chance to share these things with you, and so maybe look forward and try to prepare as best we can. So how about questions?
Joe, what's the speed limit going to be?
Yeah, good.
Can I get to
Good.
work faster now?
Yeah, you can. Yes, I think that
What's the logical safe speed limit?
Yeah, that these will still be regular cars with 4 tires, rubber tires on asphalt, so there will be a logical limit, but it's probably higher than the current 70 we've got posted out there, maybe 80 or 85 or 90 perhaps, and then at which point physics takes over and says we probably exceeded what rubber tires on asphalt can do, even with the machine driving. So probably higher speed limits, maybe differential speed limit for human versus autonomous. Regular urban streets, speed limit probably doesn't change. What probably does happen, what certainly does happen, is autonomous vehicles follow the speed limit, so the speed limits start to matter. But then on the other side of that, for the traffic engineers out there, that we get to tweak the speed limit minute by minute, cycle by cycle, hour by hour, to best fit the conditions in a way we don't get to do now. Please.
When you plan this out, is there an outside window when that window is closed, all, like, you wouldn't be able to drive your antique car anymore?
Yeah, I think not. I haven't read anybody that says that, and I agree. In the same way that riding a horse is not illegal either, or riding a bicycle, which is a 19th century technology, still legal, in fact encouraged on 21st century streets and roads. So I don't think anybody ever anticipates making human driving illegal, just it's going to be darn expensive.
I guess the question was prompted by your demonstration with your slide with the stoplights.
Yeah.
There's all the cars are controlled by computers. You just
Yep.
wave right through each other.
Yep. And it's, so it's going to be an interesting transition in that regard. Some of the authors out there say that the transition will actually be pretty quick. Maybe within even 5 years, we'll go from 20% to 80%, but maybe not. Maybe it'll take longer.
Doesn't
Yep.
that require people to have the economic means to opt into this?
No, because you subscribe. What it requires is
You already have an investment in it.
Yep. So somewhere to dump the vehicle that you've got, and that's what Mexico's for, right? There'll be a market for the secondhand vehicles.
What's the outlook for the airline?
Yeah, airlines, trains as well. Airlines, the outlook is they're going to lose ridership on some of the short distance flights. Flying here to DC doesn't make much sense anymore when you got an autonomous vehicle on an uncongested route going maybe 90 up I-95. So the airlines will lose a little bit of ridership, but not the long distance. So trains, passenger trains, like transit, an antique maybe. Please.
I recently moved from DC. I think I heard something like an average commute of 90 minutes.
Yeah.
I have people I work with that commuted 2.5 hours
Yeah.
each direction.
Yeah.
And has there been a consideration to the population explosion that
Right.
all these people who you predict won't be long?
Yeah, that's so the demographics there, 40,000 people a year is tragic, but demographics, that's a blip that we won't notice, right? That you won't walk down the street one day and look around and say, oh, there's a lot more people here than school attendance, even the healthcare system, road crashes make up something like 6% of emergency room visits. It's not a couple emergency rooms are closed, but it's not all that much.
You have an increase of people that need regular health care.
Yep. What we're going to do is the average is when we prevent a traffic crash, you gain about 10 years of life expectancy on average, and so that means more cancer deaths rather than motor vehicle deaths, and maybe the healthcare people should be getting ready for that.
And we'll need more food.
Well, sure, but again, that's at the margins. They had 40,000 people a year, even over 10 years. 400,000. That's. I'm not a agriculture economist, but y'all tell me that's probably a year's worth of productivity. One tweak of a little bit better fertilizer, and we got that covered. You
Yeah.
certainly say we're.
Yeah, it's 4:30. So
Okay, how about a couple more quick?
So the vision you've laid out seems really urban suburban.
Yeah.
How does this play out in rural landscapes like
Yeah.
Montana, Idaho, or
Yeah.
Kansas and things like that?
Good.
Does it drive people to like smaller towns?
Let's make that our last question. It's a great